We're going to be joined now by this past weekend's XC3 Pro-Am bike winner, no stranger to the GNCC series, former XC1 competitor, Jason Rains. Jason, how's everything going tonight?
Good, guys. Appreciate you having me on. It's been a long time coming, and proud to be a part of the program.
Yeah, and so I actually met you in person in a roundabout way because of the podcast, and it was right after the ISDE updates and all that. So, been talking about it for a while. So, do what?
Yeah, it worked out good. I mean, I always listen to the ISDE updates when you were putting them up. Kind of keeping informed on what was going on over at that race, and you do a great job with that.
Appreciate it. I'm hoping one of these years we can make it through all 6 days.
That's right.
I've been making it to day 3 or 4, but trying my best.
It's a lot. It's a lot of days, a lot of info, and a lot of days, and a lot of late nights.
Especially when to not be over there and not see what's going on, and then the time change is always crazy, and so then everyone's always tired and doesn't want to talk about it. So
after about like I said, after about day 3, the riders are pretty tired, and they just want to get some sleep and try to get past that next day. So the last thing they want to do is spend 20 minutes talking on the phone about updates and this and that. They want to get their goggles ready and get off to bed.
Yeah, and that's the issue that I ran into. And I've never been a part of one. I've never been over to one, so I don't know how it all works while it's there. So basically, the only thing I can do is read down the results and say them as I see them. But anybody at home can also do that. So try to make it interesting any way I can.
Yep, that's all you can do.
But, I mean, like we mentioned, former XC1 competitor, you've been around GNCC for a while. Start us off there. What year did you start racing in GNCC? And you're a Washington native, and you come all the way across the country, I believe, with a van and a dirt bike, looking to make it happen. So how did this whole thing get started?
Yeah, so basically, my career in a nutshell would be at the end of 98, I went to the ISDE over in Australia and was on the junior team, and that was kind of my first breakout performance. So then in 99, we decided that, since my name was kind of, out there, that I would, I always wanted to try the GNCCs as a kid. Well, watched them growing up and read the magazines, and that was before all the social media stuff. And it was always a series that I wanted to do because I wasn't a desert racer, and being out in Washington, you don't really have a lot of big races that are woods races. You go south for the desert stuff, and I always wanted to move east. So me and my dad decided that was the year for me to give it a try. Would be 99. So I moved back in 99 with a friend of a friend that let me stay on his couch in Pennsylvania. I had a van, a dirt bike, a gear bag, and a dresser, and that's how it all started. And 99 was a pretty good year. Ended up finishing 11th in the series overall. I rode 258 to start with, and then moved up to I got bumped to XC1 because I'd gotten a gold medal at 6 days, which it's ironic because my first XC1 race was Big Buck in 99, and that was my first. I'd won the 258 class the week prior in Georgia, and I moved up they bumped me up the next round, and it was a tough transition, obviously riding with my heroes and those guys. It was tough for me to, mentally kind of get prepared. But at the end of the year, I ended up getting a local Yamaha ride in 2000. 2001, I ended up, finishing on the, let me think about this for a second. So 2000, I finished top 5 quite a few times. So that got me a ride with the Sports Cycles team, which was a Yamaha supported team in 01. And then that year I finished on the podium 3 times, and that got me a ride with Randy Lampro in 02, and that's kind of when, everything kind of, got rolling for me, and, started winning races and being championship contention. And, so it happened pretty fast. I mean, it was I always tell people, when I left Washington, I wanted to, give it a try for a year, and then I'd go back home, work for the family business, and stay back in Washington. It was just kind of a checklist, right? Come back, do the GNCCs, check it off the list. And it turned into, I've been back here for 21 years now. So it's amazing what one leap of faith can do to your life, changes your whole life.
Yeah, exactly. And now you've kind of turned it into a family affair too. Preston's been killing it in the women's amateur ranks as well, and got you back in the mix racing XC3, and wife Emily training people and helping everyone else win their races and come up through the series too. So it's really cool to see how much is going on down there, and really through the help of you guys and Range Riding University, and it all plays a role in it. But coming from Washington, we also see Ricky Russell doing the same thing now, which Ricky's been on Yamahas the majority of the time that he's been over here, so I'm sure that you've worked with him a lot. Have you guys talked about a lot of the similarities or differences in coming from the West Coast to like tight East Coast woods racing? Like, how hard is it to make that transition?
Well, Ricky's he's from, similar area that I am in Washington, and, I think it was 2009 or 2010, I had just kind of semi-retired and stopped doing it professionally, and everybody in Washington told me, Ricky's the man. He nobody can touch him in Washington. He tried to go down and do some works races and stuff, and then he did okay doing that. But he was growing up in Washington, especially Western Washington. You ride in woods. You don't ride a lot of desert stuff. So I went back home that year. I can't remember if it was 2009 or 10, but he was riding a YZ252 stroke, and I was a year out. I think I was a year out from my professional career. So I went back and I wanted to do a race, right? I wanted to do a race with him, and we did a race together, and it was so funny because Ricky got out front, and I chased him down, and he made a big mistake, flew off the trail. And I stopped. We had a big lead at the time on the rest of the group, so I stopped on the side of the trail. I said, "Hey, Ricky," I said, "You okay?" And he looked up at me like, "What are you? Why are you? You can just tell. Like, what are you doing? Like, we're racing." So I got the lead, and I end up winning that race. And after the race, I said, "Ricky," I said, "if you really want to make a career out of this," I said, "you're going to have to take that leap. To make a full-time career, doing the wood stuff, you need to move east. There's very few guys that have done it, being on the West Coast. Rodney Smith did it, being based on the West. Steve Hatch did it. Kudrowski did it back in the day. But, you need to be in the environment. You got to ride the tracks. You got to be in the weather and the humidity, but it does take a lot of commitment. You got to leave your friends, family, and everything, But if you really want it, you need to move back. And I said, I'll do whatever I can to help you. So a year went by, never heard from him. The next year I went home, I was doing a demo, and Ricky came up, and we got to talking, and I'm like, "Hey man, you ready yet?" He said, I've been thinking about it, I think I'm ready. I said, "All right, well, let me know." So he called me, and he said he was going to come back, and he moved back here to Travelers Rest, and I was so busy doing the riding schools and the demos and stuff, I didn't have a lot of time to dedicate to him. So it was perfect timing. Wibbly's looking for somebody to train with and ride with. So I basically brought Ricky into Travelers Rest and introduced him to Paul and let him go. So that's kind of how Ricky's career started, and he's made the best of it. He's a top contender now, and he's worked hard, and he's had to make the sacrifices that it takes to when you have to move away from everything.
Thanks. Yeah, I knew you guys obviously had worked together, but I didn't realize all that backstory and how you were able to get over here.
We didn't really know each other, when we were, because I was so much. He didn't really start racing off road till I was already gone. It was funny because he actually sent me a picture of a plaque that he got at the awards banquet in 2009, I think, or I can't remember what year. Maybe 8 or 7 when he first started started racing off road, and I was at the banquet, I was the speaker, and I signed his plaque for him.
Oh, wow.
It was like 200A or 200B champion, and so that was probably the first time we ever met. But I was already kind of moved away and gone from Washington when he started racing. But it takes a lot. I mean, the other guy that's came back 2 years ago was Eric Geese, and he's making a run for it. And for me, I'm being from Washington, I know how hard it is to move across the country and leave your friends, family, and all that stuff. But at the same time, there's a small window. Once you get to a certain age, you have responsibility. You have, house payments, married kids, things like that. I mean, you can't just up and go. But when you're a little bit younger, you don't have a lot of responsibility. So that's the time to, if you're going to give it a shot, I've always lived my life, kind of being, it's better to try and fail than not try at all. You don't want to be 25 years from now thinking, man, I wonder what would happen if I would have, done this or done that. It's better to try and fail than not try at all.
Absolutely. I think it comes into one of those things where you'll regret the things you didn't do a lot more than the things that you did do and failed at.
That's exactly right. Yep.
But Eric's a good buddy of mine, and obviously we work together a lot at Full Gases, him and I helping set him up and then run him throughout the weekend and everything. And it's a bummer that he took quite the tumble at Steel Creek last year and got a concussion, kind of messed with his head a little bit. But I was actually talking to him the other day, and I think he's just now starting to get back on a bike and get competitive and go back after it again. So it's crazy how something like that can take you out for so long. 'Cause, I mean, that was over a year ago, or right at a year ago.
Yeah, he got the concussion at Steel Creek, and then he got recovered from that. Did a local race in Washington and stabbed his knee, tore his knee up, and then that's been the other part of his recovery is getting the knee repaired. And Eric actually, the first time I met Eric, he was probably, I don't know, maybe 14, 15. He came to a riding school in Washington. That's how I first met Eric, and he's a good-hearted guy and hard worker, and he wanted to. There's been a lot of people that I've talked to in Washington that have wanted to give it a try, want to do the GNCCs, but there's only been a small few that have taken the initiative to do it. It's a big commitment.
Yeah, and I mean they got a good role model in you, because obviously between you and Ricky being the big ones here in recent memory, coming over and making it happen. So it's cool that you recognize that and see that and help people out as well. But I mean, as far as when you came over, you mentioned 02 is when you got the ride with Ampro. Was 02, was that the year that you broke your leg? Was that?
Yep.
Right? And you were leading points at that time, weren't you?
Yeah, we were going into I broke my leg at the race before the breaks. It'd be like snowshoe nowadays, but I had about a 30. I had a full race lead going into that race, and that the broken leg, that's what that cost me the championship in the long run. Honestly, that was a big part of my career. A lot of people remember that, and it was hard to get over for a lot of years mentally to kind of flush that and try to keep pushing for race wins. You get discouraged, but it's a part of everybody's career. Injuries, and some guys can race for 20 years and not get hurt a bit, and then other guys, they have injuries. It's just it's weird how one rider can I was in good shape and felt like I was strong and everything. It's just I guess I had weak bones. I don't know what to say. It's weird. Like I think when Rodney Smith got hurt there towards the end of his career, he said he went like 20-some years without a broken bone, and that's just at the level, at that top level, it's hard to believe that you can, every day you practice, every day you ride, every day you race. Like there's so many adversities out there that it's amazing that people can stay healthy, for that long. And I think it's a part of, I think it's a little bit lucky at one side, and maybe I was overtraining, I think, a little bit, and not taking the recovery. So maybe that was part of it. But yeah, that was a good year. That was my breakthrough year, and that's what kind of got me my first couple of GNCC wins, and then broke the leg and tried to come back too early, which I think every racer tries to, doctor doesn't know anything. I'll just, I'll start riding before he says. And, that caused more problems in the long run with the pin and the screws and all that stuff, and which, drags on to the next year. And so that's when it kind of started, my career's kind of started the injury path. I had a lot of injuries, and, was, never won a GNCC championship, was close a number of times. But injuries always held me back. I think it was 3 years that, I was in legitimate, championship contention and, leading the points, and end up, with injuries that set me back. But it was fun. I had a good run, and, it was always everything for me was always a surprise. Even today, being able to work with Yamaha still, and after this many, I've been with Yamaha close to 20 years now, and for me it's been always a surprise. Just I'm always surprised that that all this came from leaving home.
Yeah, it's crazy how all that has come from exactly like you were talking about earlier, taking the leap and going after what you really wanted. But how did that whole thing happen? So obviously you do all the Yamaha demos, traveling all over the country doing that. How did that come about, transitioning from racing into doing the Yamaha demos?
So in 09 was my first or my last full season racing. And after that, I was doing the riding schools, and I asked Yamaha, I said, why don't you guys do demos? KTM at that point was the only other OEM doing any kind of dirt bike demos. And they said, Yamaha said, no, we don't want to do it, too much liability. So then I sent them a proposal, said, well, if I own the truck, I own the trailer, you guys supply the bikes, I provide the insurance, I'm 100% subcontractor, would you guys do it then? And that kind of, raised their eyebrow, like, oh, well, if you do that, then we don't have the liability. The big manufacturers are super concerned with, every big company nowadays is concerned about liability. So if a subcontractor takes that liability on themselves, then, it's a win-win for the brand. So that's when it all started. Was 2010 was our first year doing the demos, and it was small. Like I had 4 or 5 bikes, and I'd let people ride them in between like the lunch break during the riding schools, and then over time it's just grown to where now it's every weekend, all the time. We got multiple trucks all scattered around the country, and it's a full-time job for sure. Now we're up to 12 bikes per truck, and keeping everything organized is it's a full-time job. And I tell people all the time, now I'm a full-time mechanic. That's all I just work on bikes, like nonstop. Like never. If I have an open minute, like there's always something to do on one of these bikes.
You maintaining your bike, maintaining Preston's bike, maintaining the 12 bikes in the truck, and
yeah, and Preston's done an amazing job the last couple of years. She's turned into a good mechanic. She's taken a love to working on bikes and helping in the shop, and she does 90% of her bike stuff herself. As far as like the basic maintenance, and that was where the whole thing started with her when she started racing. It was kind of like, okay, I want to try to, I know we're kind of transitioning into a different portion here, but that's when I started racing again, was when she wanted to start racing again. Like she wanted to start racing, and I was like, well, you need somebody to train with, you need somebody to ride with, for safety. And as she started taking it more and more serious, then I took it more and more serious. And even like this year, I didn't plan on racing at all. Like, honestly, I didn't. plan on racing. And then, we worked hard all winter and, training and riding and stuff. And then I'm like, well, since we've already done the work, might as well, do the racing. So that's kind of why for me, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if it wasn't for her. And the whole 125 thing was because of her too. I'm like, well, if she's going to ride 125s, well, then I should ride 125, so then she can have bikes after, like she can have my hand-me-downs. And then so I get them set up for her, and it's worked out good. I mean, I enjoy racing, but at the same time, like as I get older, I don't enjoy I enjoy the process more now. The training and the riding and practicing, that's fun. I love that. The racing and the pressure and the expectations and, the mental stress, that gets harder for me to deal with, over time. It's just hard to deal with that every weekend.
Oh, I definitely understand that. But as far as the 125 thing goes, so that decision as far as when you did come back and start racing again, was the decision to go XC3 more based off the 125 thing with Prestin transitioning into a big bike within a few years after that, or was it more wanting to try that new class that was kind of built towards former competitors and former champions and things like that?
Well, in 18 when I did it, it was kind of a little bit of both. I mean, I knew Preston she was still riding super minis at the time, and she said she wanted me to race the complete series with her. So I was like, I started looking at classes, and I really 100% did not want to ride 3 hours ever again in my life. Like when I stopped racing in 09, I'm like, I don't ever want to race 3 hours in my entire life ever again. And then I started looking at classes, and there's nothing that I can ride in the morning race that would accumulate points. Sportsman doesn't accumulate any points for anything.
Yep.
So then I started looking at the afternoon race. And, XC1's out of the question, XC2's out of the question. If I rode 30, 40 plus, people would whine, the people would make fun of me, and they would call me sandbagger. So then it was like, I thought, well, XC3 class, there's no age restriction. There's no past champion restriction. There's really no restrictions other than 125. And then you get, from my side, the motivation was your third row, so you're a good starting position. You get on the podium if you finish on the podium, and you get a decent overall because you're further up in the rows. So that was kind of my ending, reason for doing it was, I want to ride a 125 because Preston needs a 125 in another year. Got a good starting position. You paid a championship, points. And so that's where I settled at. And
now, I mean, obviously on a YZ125 for the first season in 18, now we see the 125X, so the YZ125X. I just, as a person that's raced the 125 myself in the 125 BC class, because when I first started working for Racer TV and GNCC, I was in the same deal. I obviously had to work the pro race because that was the main focus, but I was able to work it out with them that they'd still let me race the morning race. And so same thing, I'm going through all those different classes, and it's like, man, I really don't want to go trash my bike and go through all this stuff for racing to race a sportsman class that doesn't pay anything out throughout the year. So there was a 125 BC class, and I had been riding a 450 for 2 years prior, and I said, well, I'm going to buy a 125 and race 125 BC because that's the only B class in the morning. So that's how I ended up getting a brand new YZ125 and racing it and adapting from a 450 to a 125, and it was super weird at first, but you going back and competing at the highest level on a 125, like I said, now there is the off-road version, the X. Can you tell a big difference between the YZ125 and the 125X, and which one are you riding now?
So we're both riding, Preston and I are both riding the 125X. I mean, and really like off the showroom floor, like if you're an off-road rider, exclusively the 125X off the showroom floor is ready to race. Like it's got the suspension's going to be, supple over the rocks and smooth over the roots. The power's going to be a little bit broader. You know, it's a little more tractable. Obviously for us, we do different suspension. We have a little different, carburetor setup. That's the biggest thing we found on pipe and silencer. You do some little mods here and there, but the base package is 125X. And the biggest difference off the showroom floor is the power valve mechanism. It's not a flywheel weight on the 125X stock. It's the power valve mechanism. It opens 500 RPM later, so it gives you a smoother, more broader. It doesn't come on as fast as a regular YZ125, but it pulls a lot longer. So for GNCC style stuff, where it's open and fluid and you need that. One thing I really struggled with when I rode an 18, especially when you go up north, is tractability. 125s are really hard at tractability. You got no torque, so you're either spinning or you're lugging. You're bogging. You don't have any. You're getting those rocks at snowshoe, and the thing's just spinning everywhere. Where the 125X seems to have a lot better bottom, to where it doesn't hit so hard right off the bottom. It kind of transfers into a smooth power. So you get a lot better, tractability. That's what I noticed the most is the tractability. The 18-inch wheel, that's kind of, some people, that's 6 in one end, half a dozen in the other. We've always liked the 18. Mm-hmm. Suspension, obviously everybody's different with suspension, but as far as like a guy that's looking to ride, GNCC, National Enduro, full gas, things like that, off the showroom floor, that 125X is going to be better suited. You don't have to do the suspension, you don't have to do the suspension valving to get it ready for off-road. The power is going to be smoother. I mean, the rest of the bike's very, very similar. Frame's the same. The suspension's the same externally. Internally it's a little different, but it's a 125, YZ125 base with some off-road goodies, and that's what most off-road guys I know nowadays. They don't want like a slow, soggy bike. They want a moto bike with some off-road essentials.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly right, and I've been wanting to ride that bike just because I love my 125 so much. But when I had shoulder surgery, I sold both of my bikes because I knew, also like you were talking about earlier, I knew if I had them sitting out here in the garage, I was going to try to ride them way before I needed to.
Yep.
So I ended up getting rid of them, and I've regretted getting rid of my 125 ever since then. But I'm going to come out to a demo day, and I'm going to try one of the YZ125Xs because I'm really interested in it, and I think it'd be fun to ride. And it's
125. Cool. You know what's funny about the 125 is when I do the demos, there's not a single person that comes off, the 125 or the 125X without a smile. It's like, man, this thing is light. It's fun.
Oh yeah.
125. They're way underrated. Like, when you get on one, you think it's not going to have any power, mm-hmm. and it's not going to have any bottom end, but honestly, like, I mean, even though they've, the motor's been pretty much unchanged for a number of years, I mean, they still are very usable. What I've noticed from myself is when you go from a, say a 250F or a 450F to a 125, the biggest changes, you've got to shift that motorcycle. 125, you don't have to use the clutch. Like, people override the clutch on a 125 so much, they end up smoking them. But if you shift, you got to shift. Don't use the clutch, use the shifter. That's what I've learned. When I first started riding a 125 a couple of years ago, I was the same way. Come out of a corner and you're hammering the clutch. But if you shift down, the bike's in the power.
Mm-hmm.
So don't use that's always my my thing with Prestin is don't use the clutch, use the shifter.
Interesting to note because I was one of the people a gear high.
Yeah. You gotta
my clutch.
Yeah, when you go into a corner on a 250F, you shift down one gear. 125, you shift down two. You guys, everything's more. You just shift a lot more.
See, I don't know what it is, but I love that 125, and still to this day, my best overalls at GNCC's morning races and at Mid-East, even now, 2 years later on a brand new 250F, I had way better overalls that whole year I was running a 125 than I do on my 250F, which I can't figure out.
doesn't make sense.
No,
But
it happened.
125 you can flog. You can, you're not intimidated by it. It's you can throw it around. It's kind of like me when I ride a 450. I feel like the bike's kind of in control, and it's a lot to hang on to. Where you get on the 125 and you're not afraid of it. You sling it where you want it to, and you can bash it around, and it's not going to hurt you.
Exactly, and plus the suspension out of the box is so good on those things that you really don't have to worry about anything there. But so also like I said, I want to come out to a demo day and ride one of those 125Xs and the 125 back to back to see how they do, and it's cool that you kind of created that demo program. So and I'm a product of it because, as we talked about before, I mean, I was pretty much sold on getting a Honda. I had ridden some Hondas. I loved them. I was sold on it. Well, I went out to the demo day at GTR and rode the Honda and the YZ250F back to back, and was able to see the differences back to back, and that's what sold me on going to buy a brand new Yamaha, was having it accessible to me at a demo day. So that's awesome that you're able to do that, and that people are able to come out and ride whatever they want out of the whole lineup.
Yeah, it's been definitely, especially nowadays, I think, the bikes are so expensive, that, people want to make sure when they get that bike and they roll it off the, showroom, I mean, that it's what they wanted. And our sport is one of the very few, honestly, one of the very few things in this industry or this, world that you can't test ride. If you want to buy a dozer, you can go, they'll give it to you for a day, and then if you like it, you buy it. Cars you test drive, ATV side-by-sides you can test drive, but motorcycles are one of the few things that you read magazines, you talk to your buddies if you can ride your buddy's bike, but there's no definite way to know exactly, what you want. And I see it every weekend. You get 5 guys that ride one specific model, and they have 5 different opinions. Everybody's looking for different, power, ergonomics, feel, handlebar position, seat to foot peg position. Everybody's looking for, whatever it is, whatever that feel that they're looking for. And, I feel that, we do a lot of demos, throughout the country, and it's amazing to see different areas, different people like, different bikes. When you're on the East Coast, it's primarily, 250, 250F, 252 stroke, still real popular, 125. When you start going west, that's when you start seeing more 450, more 450 stuff, more open, more open type stuff. But like I said, it's pretty neat to see, the riders, I mean, like I said, not everybody likes whatever. They may ride, 4 or 5 bikes and may not like any of our bikes. But at the same time, it's to me, it's a beneficial, program just for that main reason. You want to make sure that, when you make that, $9,000 investment, this isn't a, $4,000 motorcycle anymore. You want to make sure when you get it home that that's what you wanted. Yeah,
that's exactly right. So it's cool, like you said, to be able to go out there and have that opportunity. And I mean, without that,
it definitely continues to grow every year. I mean, we're to the point now where last year we did close to 14,000 demo rides, and wow. It's getting to the point now where I don't know how to make it any make it any bigger or do any more. I mean, because we're doing what I do. It's got to be on the weekends, and that's where it's a tough balance for me to be able to try to do some racing and make sure that I do my do the demos and stuff. Is we can't do demos on a Tuesday afternoon.
Yeah, it probably wouldn't be too big of a turnout then.
No, only a few places I can think of. Like if you go to say I would say Milestone before they got shut down, but you can go to, if you went out west at a Paula or something like that on a Wednesday afternoon, you could have a pretty decent turnout. But most places that we know on the East Coast, yeah, you'd be hearing crickets.
Unless you're able to do it here soon when everyone's got coronavirus and is off work and can be at the
Yeah,
track
that's
on
right.
Tuesday.
Yeah, there we go. Good idea. Everybody's off work and off school. Let's go track riding.
Do some demo days. But man, still making it happen, still getting back out to the races, and obviously, I mean, you've been at the first 3 rounds, second place at Big Buck, and a big asterisk there, and 7th at round 2, and then you cap it all off with a win yesterday in Georgia. But second at Big Buck, it's got to be. I mean, I don't know how your feelings are about it, but you led, I think, all but 2 laps of that race, and the first one and the last one. But I was on my way over to the podium, or to the finish line, rather, and you and Zach both came by me wheel to wheel down pro row. So sitting there watching both of you, you're in the lead, and then from the time you get from there to the finish line, Zach had made the pass and got the win there. You got second. What happened in that section of woods between pro row and the finish line?
Well, I mean, honestly, like I had, going in the 2-lap card, I had about a 38-second lead on Zach, and Zach's a great rider. I mean, he's strong, he's young, and I felt good. Big Buck's always been a good round, good race for me. I mean, that's real familiar conditions to what we ride in all the time, and for whatever reason, them last 2 laps, I just lost my mental focus, I'll say. I started making little stupid mistakes, tip overs, and, finally one of the tip overs turned into a bent shift shaft, and I couldn't shift the bike, and, Zach caught me, and he got around me, and, he was flooring it. He had plenty of energy left, and I gave up, honestly. Like, mentally, once he caught me, I'd, kind of got the balloon popped, and it was hard that last, like I said, more than anything, it wasn't a physical. I didn't get physically tired. It was just like, when you get mentally, you're not sharp, and you just make these little mistakes and tip overs, and you're taking bad lines, and things aren't flowing, and just stupid mistakes. And he reeled me in and passed me, and that was kind of it. But I knew, for me, that first round was really fun. Like, me and Zach rode together the first part of the race, and Zach's a good rider, and I love riding with somebody with experience like he's got. Takes good lines, is real smooth. I've ridden with him a little bit over the years. I know that he's clean, and we rode really good together there the first part of the race, and he was he was going fast. I mean, it was I was more happy than anything after Big Buck that I was like, all right, it's been 2 years since I did this. I'm 41 now, so I was real concerned. But I'm not concerned with the experience and the line selection, things like that. It's more the speed, right? That's what you're always worried about. Is, do I still have the speed to run with these younger guys? And Big Buck was for me, even though I finished second, it was a confidence builder for me. I was like, all right, I know I have the speed to still run with these guys.
And is it 3 for 3 with hole shots? I didn't see the Florida.
No, I didn't get the whole shot in Florida. No. Preston's 3 for 3. She's got the whole shot every single race. She's lightning starter.
Dang. And so that was one of the things I asked you yesterday when you were waiting to get on the podium, is how in the world both of you guys get such good starts?
Just practice. I learned from Wibbly. Wibbly was kind of the master of starts. I think he got that one year, was it 14, 15? When him and Caleb were battling for the championship that year. That was the last year that Caleb lost the championship, was whatever year that was. But Paul got every hole shot, every hole shot that year.
12? 11 or 12? Caleb's won 7?
Yeah, so it'd have been, it'd have been 11, 10 or 11. I can't remember. But every time when we would ride together, Paul would do, every time he threw a leg over a motorcycle, he'd do starts, repetitive starts. And, the start's a big part of the race, even though, and in reality you have 3 hours, the start is a key ingredient to how your day is going to go. You get a good start, you can control the race, you can see the pace, you stay with that, lead pack, so to speak. Where if you get a bad start, mentally it starts your day off negatively, and you're fighting all day. So that's why we've put a lot of, I've always put a lot of emphasis on, trying to get up front early, especially for me now. I mean, I know when I was, the young guy coming up, and Rodney Smith was kind of the older guy, and Fred Andrews, I mean, those guys that I were racing with, they were a little bit older than I was, and that's what they would do to me. They'd get the start, and they'd hold me back. They'd play the game. They wouldn't let me go. I couldn't get around them. They'd go really fast in the open stuff, and they'd get in the tight stuff. They'd slow down. They would control the race until they were ready to go. So for me now, it's like that's what I try to do, is try to, if I get a good start, I can control the race. Where if I'm behind, then I can't control it. And that's kind of what happened in Florida. I got a bad start, and, those guys were gone. Like I couldn't, they were just riding. They just flustered me.
It's funny you say that, because yesterday at Georgia, and I wrote these lap times down, or not lap times, but each lap. Now, second place kind of changed a couple times throughout the race, but you get the whole shot, and then on the second lap, you were 1 minute and 9 seconds ahead of second place. Third lap, 2:39. Fourth lap, 2:55. Fifth lap, 2:51. And then you got the win by 2 minutes and 11 seconds. So, I mean, from green to checkers, you kind of didn't control pace at all. You kind of got out in front and put your head down and really gained some ground on them guys. How did that feel?
Well, I mean, Georgia's always been a good round, for me over history. I won that race in 2004, XC1. Just always felt comfortable there. I mean, it just, and in this race especially, like, my plan was to execute just like I had started to execute it. So I got the whole shot, and then Jason Lipscomb passed me about a mile in, and I was content with that. I'm following in second. I've turned into a better follower than I used to be a better leader. Now I'm a better follower, because what I've learned is the younger guys have better hand-eye coordination, so they see more. They see better lines, and it's easier for me to just follow them. It takes a lot of stress off, right? From, you can attest to that. When you're following somebody, you're just keying off of them. You're not looking anywhere. You're just following that tire. So I was pretty content in second, and we came around right before the finish, and I saw Brody coming up on us. And, I've, known Brody Johnson for forever, since he was, not even old enough to ride a dirt bike. And, I could see him coming, and I know Brody's going forward, like, period. Like, he's going to pass us all. He's going to finish, top 20 overall. Mm-hmm. So when he passed us, I'm like, I felt pretty good, and I'm like, well, let's see if I want to just try to hang with Brody. And that's exactly what I did. And he literally, like, that was the reason that I was able to go, was I wasn't riding. I was just following him, like, wherever he was going. And he had, like, that's what really made, this race is what really made me realize how much faster the hand-eye coordination is on a younger person, because, like, following Brody, like, we come up on a mud hole, and he would instantly find a line and go for it, like, whether it be, like, off the trail, or maybe it was cutting across, or we had nobody pointing us lines. He was just going, and I just stuck with him. I mean, I just stuck with him the next lap and a half, and then I stopped for gas. And when I came out from gas, he didn't. I have to stop every 2 laps, where he only has to stop once. So when I stopped, I lost him, and I'm like, crap! Like, I don't want to do this for myself. Like, I don't have to key off of now. I was seriously worried. I'm like, I don't know if I could do this with myself now. Like, it was so fun following him. Like, he was taking all the chances, and he had all the stress because he was picking the lines. Well, then I went as fast. I pushed really hard. I caught back up to him, and then I got in the zone again. Just kind of followed him, and then he stopped for gas, and I got around him. And then after the third lap is when he went past me, and he was going. That's when he started flooring at lap 4, from lap 4 on. And for me, I've memorized a lot of the lines that he had taken, and you know, a race like that to me, like that's like Big Buck was like that, and this race was like that, where you have to pick and choose. You can't just floor it. You know, where Florida, that's where I struggle, is when it's really fast and you got good traction and you just hammer the main line. Like those guys are just they're faster. Like I don't have that raw speed anymore. For me, it's the races that are going to be better for me are going to be the ones that you have to go at a good pace, but you still have to be smart. You can't just blow through stuff or you get stuck.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so this race went, you know, by the 4th lap, and like I said, this track's always been, I don't know what it is about it. You know, it's always been, you know, a good track for me, and you know, it couldn't have been, you know, couldn't have been much better as far as how the race went, and you know, no mistakes, no problems, no getting stuck. You know, everything went really smooth.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because Georgia is one of those tracks, and I think Georgia more so than any other track as far as lines opening up everywhere. Like a lot of times, some of the tracks get pretty one line for the most part, but it seems like Georgia, every single year, there is 8 million different ways to take around the same exact section.
Yeah, you might come into a section behind a guy and never see him ever again. He may have gotten ahead of you. I mean, there was one section in particular. It was over by the 7, and Caleb and I were looking at it. I was biking the track, and Caleb was over there, and we were looking at this little water hole. And I mean, there was 2 lines through it on Saturday afternoon from the quad race.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time we got there, I mean, the track got literally 300 yards wide with 5 million lines. And then it all filtered into 2, you know, so depending where you wanted to go, if you wanted to go in the middle and chance of getting stuck, or if you wanted to jump the ditch, there was a jump line, there was all the way around both sides, it was way out of the way, you know, but that's always been Georgia, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and typically what happens, what I've learned about Georgia is the beginning part of the race, everybody starts fanning out, wider.
Yep.
By the last 2 laps, the middle lines haven't been used, that they're filled back in with mud and silt and sediment, and they're fine. They're good to go again.
Mm-hmm.
So you go back. You start going wider, and then you go back to where you started.
Yeah, I was talking to Grant, and he was saying the same exact thing before the race. He was saying how typically that's how it ends up getting, that the lines go super wide, but then by the end of the race, the lines right down the middle where everyone was riding mountain bikes before the race, those are the good lines to take.
That's right. It all goes, yeah. I mean, there was half a dozen lines that I took on the last lap that I didn't take any other part of the race, because you know they like I said, with water being there, and as they ride, the mud and the silt and they get filled back in.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it's and most of that place has a pretty good base. That's why I was really worried when it started raining. You know, there kind of started sprinkling a little bit about midway point of the race. Once it starts raining there, it goes completely away. You remember 2014 at that track? That was mayhem. It was pouring down rain all day long. That was miserable.
Yeah, and lucky that rain missed the way that it did, where we only just got a little bit of it, or like you said, that could have gotten really rough and rowdy pretty quick.
Well, I looked at the weather report that morning. It's supposed to start raining at 1 o'clock and rain the rest of the day. Yep. You know, like when we were on the starting line, it should have started raining and rained it all day long.
Yep.
That would have been, because that little bit of rain we got pretty slippery. You know, just that little bit of rain, that red clay don't take much.
Mm-mm. I think that must have been the reward from up above for being the only sport event still going on that weekend.
Right. Yeah, we'll give them a little break here.
Yeah, we said we'll revert
You've had that
this
2 years in a row there, because last year was supposed to rain there sideways too, and you know, same thing. It turned out to be a beautiful, you know, perfect track, and you know, I mean, it couldn't have. Even though, I mean, Georgia's always got them mud holes and springs and stuff. I mean, the rest of the track was really good shape. I mean, good traction, you know, good good ruts, and I think it's such a that place has always got every aspect. You got dust, like the moto track was all dusty, and that open stuff up by the pit area was dusty.
Mm-hmm.
And then you drop down in the woods, and it's perfect traction. You drop down in the valleys, in the mud, it's got the 3 tiers.
And then all the pollen too.
Oh yeah. And I got home to South Carolina, and I figured we'd have a bunch of pollen. We didn't have no pollen here.
Yeah, that's the same thing here. There's no pollen at my house, but down there everything was green.
Yeah. I mean, it was all that slime, especially with that little bit of rain we had, turned into slime.
Exactly. But man, one thing I gotta ask you, it came up in the booth. I was actually in the commentary booth for the whole race, and one of the things that came up was talking about the pace that everyone is running at the GNCCs now, or the lack there of a pace, and how there used to be a time where you kind of settled down into the groove and then pushed at the end, but now it's a sprint from the beginning. Everyone is battling from the beginning. Everyone is riding as hard as they can straight out of the gate, and Yamaha came up during the broadcast as mainly the guy that changed that and started sprinting from the get-go. And you in particular are a guy that was at the top of the level of the sport before Yamaha, and also stayed around after Yamaha. So you saw what it was like racing on the front line before, during, and after that whole transition. What would you say? I mean, how much of that change did you see happening at that time, or looking back on it now?
So I'd say, in the beginning, like the beginning part of my career, it was a trail ride till gas. So everybody just kind of rode around. I mean, everybody's riding pretty good, but they weren't really sprinting. After the gas stop, everybody started really, blowing through. Like that's when it was time to go. That was like 99. And then 2000s when Watsy came in. Then Watts came in, and he did the opposite. He would sprint as hard as he could, but he would die at the end. But he had such a big lead that he would just kind of float it in. And that was 2001, I think, when Watsy started really putting that different. He just changed the game. He didn't ride wide open the whole time, but he changed the way it was ridden. So then everybody started, like, for me, like, I feel like 2002 and 3, before Yamaha, that's when, the rest of us started, we started seeing what Watsy was doing. So then we would try to, mimic his, try to get the pace, but also, the training started getting a lot more, more important, off the bike. So in, 2002, when I was, winning, that's kind of was, that was my, my calling card was I could run, good pace in the beginning, but I never get tired. Like, for me, that was my biggest thing was I could, last 2 laps. That's when I could really, really go hard. And then when Yamaha came in, he started the whole sprint from the start to finish. There was really no pace. And then I think, in that era, you figure, Caleb and, and Thad and, these, most of the guys that are, on the front row now, they were watching him. So every generation looks at the next generation that, that they're ahead of. So the kids that are racing, B class and youth now are watching Caleb. Like, what is he doing? Like, they're mimicking that. So the next generation will, that's the beauty of sports is it's always a revolution. Somebody else will come up and do something different, because they learn off the generation. You look at motocross when Stewart first started doing the scrub, like, a lot of the current guys that he was racing against never seen it. Where now kids on, 50s are doing it.
Yeah.
It just, it elevates the game, and I think with any sport that involves money, I think that, people are willing to, to put more in, push harder, train harder. I know it's going to be, Caleb is going to be, I think he's going to be impossible to replace as far as, he's just so, watching him grow up as a kid, like when I was winning, he was on 65s or 85s, I think, and watching him grow up, like, and, what he's done for the sport and, his strengths. Like, I've always had a lot of respect for anybody that can be that successful repetitively, like a Carmichael or a Dungy or a Villapoto, to be that successful, repetitively. That takes a lot of, mental strength, like to be able to
in anything, especially this.
Yeah, it's 3 hour races like this. There's so much that can happen. Whether it be, your machine, your body, bottlenecks. There's anything you can imagine can happen in a 3 hour race. And for him to be so strong for so long, it's pretty amazing. I mean, to know, like I could do it from when I was racing. I could do it, a few times a year and win some races and, but to do it over and over, I could never figure out the mental game. And even, that's always been the hardest thing to figure out is your mental game. Even like this weekend, Caleb showed up to the line late. I don't know why, but he had to. He showed up to the line late, and he had to hold Rodney off from announcing him because he had to go to the bathroom, and that would have flustered me. Like thinking to myself, that would have flustered me because I was out of my system. But he did whatever he does and switched it over, and did what he does. He's very smart, very resourceful. There's no terrain that he hasn't figured out how to. That was even Yuha. Like Yuha in the rocks. Like that was Yuha's biggest, weakness was you got him in the rocks, and we were watching old GNCC videos from the mid 2000s, and when we went to like the Wisp and places like that with rocks, like Yuha was like way off the pace. So every rider has had weaknesses throughout their career. Watsy had his weaknesses. David Knight had his weaknesses. I had mine. Barry had his. Like I think that Caleb was one of the few guys that I've ever seen in this newer generation that doesn't matter. Like mud, rocks, roots, sand. He's solid.
Yeah,
makes it tough to beat a guy like that.
And just the progression of it, and like you said, coming up through it in 7 years, he's won the championship and stayed relatively healthy throughout it all. And I know he's had a couple surgeries from a couple different injuries, but they happened at the right time at the end of the season where he already put himself in a good enough position that those injuries didn't really come into effect. Yeah,
he's it's all been and he's had to work hard for it. I mean, it's been it's been a lot of work for him. Watching him, like I said, watching him grow up. I think that he maybe not worked that hard in the beginning part of his career and just kind of did it on natural talent. And then he I know he said it a couple times, but after Paul beat him that year, like he vowed that'd never happen again. Like I think that could have been a spark that lit the fire.
Dang. And you've kind of seen. I was a little bit late getting into it all, but you've seen Caleb come from mini bikes into being the winningest rider on bikes.
Yeah, and like I said, him growing up, like him and Thad they've been racing each other since they were little kids, and through the amateurs and through the XC2 ranks and the A ranks, Thad was always the faster of the two. They used to ride down here a lot when they were younger, and Thad was, typically always the faster guy. And then once they went to XC1, like, it seems like the tables have been turned a little bit where, Thad or, Caleb's just a touch better. I mean, Thad's been right there, for a number of years. And, it's pretty, like I said, the most impressive thing for me is to be able to do it, year in, year out, week in, week out, that mental intensity and aggression. That's what I feel you lose as you get older, is that ability to push to that next level that hurts. And he's a machine.
Yeah, I don't think anybody can really argue that. But one thing I do want to talk to you about, and I know that we've kind of been talking for a while here, and I appreciate you taking the time out. No, it's awesome to hear the stories, and like I said, I really appreciate you taking the time out. But you mentioned the Wisp and some old VHSs and some things like that, and it made me think about the fact that I think it was a little bit over 2 years ago now, we posted on the OTP page the 03 Wisp when You and Barry came around the first corner, barely missed a kid running out onto the track, and then Randy Hawkins ended up cleaning the kid out. Luckily, he didn't get hurt, but we posted that video, and you were one of the first people to comment on it, and so I just wanted to get your full take of what you remember from that and how all that happened.
I mean, that's just like what Caleb went through. I mean, that's our sport. Unfortunately, is, I mean, you're in an open woods. I mean, people be standing everywhere, and I mean, when I've been out walking the track, on Saturday, I've almost, quad guys yell at me, get out of the way, I'm in the wrong line or whatever, and it's I know with that race, it was that kid started to, I guess the story is the kid started walking across the starting line. Well, GNCC is nice and quiet, and nothing happened, and all of a sudden the roar.
Yep.
Well, when the kid heard the roar, he started walking back the other way, and he didn't realize he's in the middle of the start. Well, then we come around the first turn, and Barry and I were fighting for the whole shot, and this kid was right in the middle of the track. Well, we split him. We split the kid. He's still like a deer in the headlights, doesn't know where to go. He's trying to go left, trying to go right. In the midst of back in those days when you watched those races, I mean, there was 30 people in the pro class.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of that's for XC2. So you had
there was one pro class.
That's right, one pro class. And then Randy came around, and he'd gotten a bad start, but he snuck around the inside. Well, the kid had started working his way towards that way, and Randy come up on him, and Randy was really worried. Randy's always been a sportsman, first and foremost, and he slid into the kid and took him out. But he hit the brakes, so he kind of swept him off his feet. And Randy got up, kept going, and the whole lap he's thinking, man, I think I broke both these kids' legs, broke both of his legs because the way that he hit him, just slid into him.
Yeah.
And,
the kid flew pretty far, too.
Yeah, I mean, the kid it was, and the day after the first lap, I mean, Carrie Jo and Rita have always been, pretty mindful of that kind of stuff, because I run over a girl at Sunday Creek one time, going down pro pits. I was leading. And the girl went one way, went the other, and I clipped her with my bark buster. And the whole next lap, I'm thinking, man, I killed this little girl.
Oh, no.
But at the finish, same for Randy that year. Like, when I went to the finish at Sunday Creek, Carrie Jo came up and said, hey, Jason, that's when we had to stop. There were no transponders. They had to go barcode. And when we stopped for that second, for Randy and myself, Carrie Jo said, hey, the person's fine. You're good. So to kind of let you – because, I mean – even though you're out there racing, when you do something like that, it kind of sits in the back of your mind, like, what just happened? Yeah. Like, it takes you a little while to think about it, but then once you get about 4 miles after the fact, you think, I could have hurt this person bad. So then you're trying to race, but you're thinking about what just happened 4 miles ago. It finally sets in. At first it's like no big deal. You're racing, you're going for it. But as you keep going, your mind starts unfolding this situation that just happened. And then, so it's mentally, it can be, it can be a little mentally distracting. But that's happened numerous times. I remember I was at St. Clairsville, or not St. Clairsville, it was Yerkesville, Ohio one year, and it was really muddy. They had this big hill climb there, and I come up on this hill climb, and I floored it to go up there. People were scattered everywhere along this hill. And I run this guy over, cleaned him out, just run him straight over. He's right in the middle of the trail. After the race, excuse me, this guy was pretty big too. This guy starts coming over my way, and my dad's like, "Oh crap, that's the guy you hit." Mm-hmm. And I go, "Yep, I think that's him." He's like, "Well, go ahead and get in the box, Stan." This guy comes up and his pants are ripped halfway off his body. And he's like, dude, that was the best thing ever. Can you sign these pants for me? So that's our GNCC family. You know what I mean? Like, even though they get run over, beat up, the spectator. I mean, you've been to Ironman Hill. Those people love that. Like, it's pretty, very unique, what we our fan base is very, very dedicated to hike out in the woods and watch us and also to take the bumps and bruises that they encounter.
No, you're absolutely right about that. I actually 2 years ago at Steel Creek, when Ben Kelly and Josh Toth were battling for that XC2 championship, that when you go back across to where the old start was and run that section and come back across, well, you come down that long straightaway before turning and going across the creek. A group of girls were cutting across the track right at that time, and I'm pretty sure, I don't remember if it was Ben or Josh. I think it was Ben, though. Just absolutely, like, hit the girl square with his front number plate. Like, as good as you can make contact, he made contact with this girl, and she went flying off the trail. And I went over. The first thing I did after I found out she was okay is I went over and told the team, I was like, hey, next lap, when he pits, let him know that girl he hit was okay. And they're like, what are you talking about? I was like, he just creamed some girl over there. But I was like, she's good.
He'll know. Yeah, that means a lot. Like, I know for me, like, that when I did that, to that girl in the pits, like when Carrie Jo said, hey, she's okay, it was like, oh, like even for you doing that for whichever one it was, Josh or Ben, when they came into pits, like, that would make them, it would ease their mind, because
yeah.
Like, a racer's mind is especially when, you being a racer too, I mean, racer's mind is a very delicate thing when they're out there racing, and there's a lot of stuff going through there at once. And, when you have something like that, it in the moment, it doesn't bother you, but over, a couple, 3-4 miles, that's when things start setting in and you start thinking about what just happened. Like, shit, I could have killed this person.
Man.
Bark her in the side of the head, or, you can do some, serious damage.
I would love to see the guys sign pants today.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that was awesome, because the guy was massive, too, and I'm like, man, this guy's coming to beat me up, No, he loved it. It was the best thing ever.
Or the kid from the Wisp in 03. Wonder if he still runs across GNCC starting line somewhere.
It's a good story. I'm sure he never forget it, because we never did.
Well, man, I appreciate you a lot taking the time out
sir.
and talking with me. It's awesome to hear all the stories, and we got to get together. I got to come down there and ride and check out the place and sit down and do a little bit more bench racing with you. But
absolutely, I appreciate the opportunity. I know we've been talking about this for a couple of years now, so glad to finally get her done.
Yeah, absolutely. I finally got back and started doing it consistently. So I had a little bit of lapse there, but yeah, man, like you said, I'm glad it's finally happened. I'm glad we're finally able to get to talk. And what other rounds can we expect you at racing this year?
Well, I'm just gonna kind of go race by race. I mean, I didn't plan on going to Steel Creek, but we, obviously that race has been, canceled or postponed now, because I had a big desert race to go to and do demos out in Washington, but that's been canceled now. So that if GNCC comes up with a weekend, that weekend, I'll be there. And then, I'd really like to go to Kentucky. I like that track. That's an old track from years ago we used to do.
Yep.
I'm just going to kind of kind of keep going as we go. I don't have any plans to do the whole series, but we'll just see. We'll just keep kind of going with the flow.
All right, well, good deal. Looking forward to it, and good luck in any future rounds you do decide to go to. And thank you once again, and awesome being able to catch up and hear all those stories from you.
All right, Tyler. Have a good night, man. Thanks for having me.
Yep. Bye.
All right.